Welcome back to Ocean Revenge. The story you're about to hear takes place in Austin, Texas. For 8 months, I worked under a boss who told me my chronic illness was an excuse for laziness. He said the ADA was for real disabilities, not for people like me who looked normal. My name is Jordan Hayes. I'm 29 now, and I work as a disability inclusion consultant. I make $180,000 a year, which is ironic because the man who tried to destroy my career is the reason I have this job. I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease when I was 22 during my senior year of college. Crohn's is an inflammatory bowel disease where your immune system attacks your digestive tract. It causes severe abdominal pain, nausea, extreme fatigue, and urgent need to use the bathroom. Flare-ups can last days or weeks, making it impossible to do anything except survive. For 2 years, I struggled to accept that I had a chronic illness that would never go away. I went through the stages of grief, denial, anger at my body for betraying me, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance that this was my new normal. By 25, I'd figured out how to keep my Crohn's relatively controlled through a strict medication schedule, careful diet, and stress management. Working remotely gave me the flexibility to manage symptoms without added stress. I got a job at TechVantage as a data analyst when I was 26. It was perfect. The company had a strong remote work policy. My boss, Marcus Chen, was understanding because his sister had ulcerative colitis. He understood that invisible disabilities are real, even if you can't see them. I was good at my job, really good. My performance reviews were excellent for 3 years. I consistently exceeded targets on data accuracy, project completion, and client satisfaction. Marcus told me I was on track for a promotion to senior analyst with a $25,000 raise. I was excited about the leadership responsibilities. I loved the work and wanted to grow. Then, in January of last year, Marcus left to take a job at another company. TechVantage hired Derek Palmer as the new VP of Operations. From the first all-hands meeting, Derek made it clear what kind of leader he would be. Derek was one of those tech executives who talks constantly about hustle culture and grinding. He said, "I don't believe in work-life balance. I believe in work-life integration, which means your work is your life. And if you're not willing to give 110%, you won't succeed." He announced that the remote work policy was being eliminated immediately. He believed innovation only happens when people are together, collaborating face-to-face. Everyone working remotely, including me, would need to return to the office 5 days a week, starting the following Monday. Or we could resign if we weren't committed. I felt panic rising in my chest because working from home wasn't a preference. It was a medical accommodation that allowed me to manage a chronic illness. I immediately sent an email to HR explaining I had Crohn's disease covered under the ADA. Remote work was a reasonable accommodation that allowed me to perform my job duties. HR responded saying they'd review my request and get back to me within a week. But Derek sent me a direct message on Slack saying, "I got your email to HR. I just want to be clear that we're building a high-performance team here. I need people who are all-in, not people who need special treatment. That message should have been my first warning that Derek didn't understand or care about disability law, but I was still hoping HR would handle it properly. 2 days later, HR sent me a formal letter denying my accommodation request. Derek had determined that in-person collaboration was an essential function of my role. I could request other accommodations like a flexible start time or additional breaks, but working from home was no longer an option under the new leadership structure. I tried to make it work because I needed the job and the health insurance that covered my $3,000 monthly Crohn's medication. The stress of commuting, disrupted meals, and long meetings without bathroom access took a toll on my body. By mid-March, I was in a full-blown flare-up, forcing me to call in sick for 3 days with a formal doctor's note. Derek's email arrived, suggesting I schedule sick days around our workflow. I stared in disbelief. You cannot schedule a chronic illness flare-up any more than you can schedule a hurricane. Derek's idea showed a fundamental misunderstanding of what chronic illness actually is. Upon my return, Derek called me into his office for a serious conversation about my commitment. He said, ADA is for people with real disabilities, people in wheelchairs or blind, people with visible conditions. He questioned, you look completely normal, so how am I supposed to believe you're actually disabled? I explained Crohn's is a serious autoimmune condition recognized by the ADA, even if he couldn't see it. Derek cut me off, saying, I work when I'm sick, everyone works when they're sick. That's what adults do, he added. Millennials like you use health issues as an excuse to avoid working hard. I've never needed 3 days off for a stomachache. I left that meeting humiliated and furious. I called my father, a Labour attorney, that night. He listened and said, Jordan, what Derek is doing has a name, disability discrimination, and it violates federal law. He advised, the most important thing you can do right now is document everything. So I created a detailed spreadsheet tracking every discriminatory comment with dates, times, locations, and witnesses. I saved every email and Slack message and started recording meetings where legally permitted. Without Derek knowing, I was building a paper trail that would eventually destroy his career. Over 8 months, Derek systematically dismantled everything I'd built at TechVantage. He redistributed my largest client accounts, saying he needed people he could rely on for consistent delivery. He made comments in team meetings like, if Jordan decides to show up today, we can get started, or we would have finished this project on time. But some people needed extended sick leave. Every comment was designed to make me look unreliable, to chip away at my reputation, to make me feel so ashamed of my chronic illness that I'd quit, saving Derek the trouble of firing me. This tactic is known as constructive dismissal, just as illegal as outright termination based on disability. The final move came in July. Derek put me on a performance improvement plan with impossible metrics. My father immediately identified it as deliberately impossible, requiring 100% attendance with 0 sick days. Patricia Mendes, the disability discrimination attorney, confirmed this PIP is a setup. They're documenting fake performance failures so they can fire you without appearing to fire you for having a disability. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you're watching from right now. Have you ever had a boss who dismissed your illness because they couldn't see it? The number of people sharing similar stories reminds me this isn't isolated, but a pattern for invisible disabilities. I reached out to Sarah Chen, a former TechVantage employee who'd left before Derek arrived. She said, "Oh my God, he did the exact same thing to me," describing her fibromyalgia. Derek told her chronic pain wasn't a real disability and she needed to toughen up. She eventually left voluntarily because the hostile environment worsened her mental and physical symptoms. Sarah agreed to a formal statement. Patricia tracked down a third former employee with diabetes. Derek had similarly forced them out. Patricia said, "We have multiple violations here, including failure to accommodate hostile work environment, retaliation, and constructive dismissal." She declared, "This is one of the clearest ADA violation cases I've seen in my entire career." We filed the federal lawsuit in late October, naming Derek and TechVantage as corporate defendant. Filed as a class action, representing all three of us. 2 days later, the story leaked to TechCrunch. Within hours, Derek's emails calling employees with chronic conditions dead weight went viral. The disability advocacy community responded intensely, thousands sharing their own workplace discrimination stories. Petitions demanded Derek's resignation, and former TechVantage employees posted anonymously. They'd witnessed his behavior for years, but were too scared to speak up. I watched from my apartment, thinking about how long Derek had operated without consequences, because people were too afraid to fight back. The board of directors at TechVantage held an emergency meeting for days after the lawsuit became public. They were furious that Derek's behavior had exposed the company to millions in potential damages and reputational harm. On November 2nd, 1 week after we filed, TechVantage announced Derek Palmer had been terminated. The CEO released a public statement saying his conduct was inconsistent with their values. I was home having a Crohn's flare-up, triggered by the stress of the lawsuit, when I saw the news. The irony wasn't lost on me that discrimination caused the stress that triggered the disability Derek claimed wasn't real. I called Sarah and we both cried. After 8 months of feeling powerless, we'd made something happen. TechVantage's lawyers came back in mid-November with a settlement offer of $850,000. It included a binding commitment to implement comprehensive disability inclusion programs and mandatory ADA training. Also, the creation of a disability employee resource group and hiring external consultants to redesign their accommodation process. This time, there was no NDA because the case was already public and we insisted on keeping it that way. My share after legal fees was approximately $170,000. That money changed my life. It paid off student loans and medical debt that had been accumulating for years. What mattered more was that TechVantage had to actually change their systems. Not just writing a check and hoping the problem disappeared quietly. That's how companies buy silence. 2 weeks after the settlement, the CEO called and asked if I'd be willing to meet. He said the lawsuit was a wake-up call, exposing serious gaps in their understanding of disability inclusion. He offered me an external consulting role to design and implement their new program at $180,000 annually. Plus premium health insurance covering all my Crohn's medications and treatments with no out-of-pocket costs. I accepted, realizing I could create more meaningful change by helping companies build better systems from the inside. My first project was interviewing employees across TechVantage about their accommodation experiences. Derek's attitudes weren't unique, but reflected a broader culture where disability was seen as weakness. Accommodations were seen as special treatment rather than legal rights that cost the company nothing to provide. The first manager training session I led, I stood in front of 40 managers and executives. I told them my story about being told I looked too normal to be disabled. I watched their faces shift as they heard a real account of what discrimination feels like. Several people came up to me afterward and quietly disclosed their own hidden conditions. A woman with rheumatoid arthritis she'd been hiding for years. A man with severe anxiety taking medication in secret. Because mental health wasn't taken seriously in tech culture. That response told me everything about how much damage the culture had done and how much work there was to do. After completing TechVantage's program, I launched my own disability inclusion consulting firm with Sarah Chen. Within 6 months, we had contracts with 5 tech companies afraid of becoming the next lawsuit headline. By the end of year 1, we were generating $500,000 in annual revenue and had trained over 500 managers. As for Derek Palmer, he struggled to find another VP role because my lawsuit came up in every background check. He eventually took a director-level position at a much smaller company for probably half his previous salary. I don't spend time celebrating that, but I do feel quiet satisfaction knowing there were real consequences. What I want every person watching this to understand is that invisible disabilities are protected under the ADA, including Crohn's disease, fibromyalgia, diabetes, mental health conditions, chronic migraines, and autoimmune disorders. Employers are legally required to provide reasonable accommodations unless doing so creates genuine undue hardship. Most accommodations cost nothing at all. Flexible scheduling, remote work options, modified break times, permission to take medication during work hours. These adjustments make the difference between thriving or being forced out. Any employer who tells you otherwise is either uninformed or hoping you don't know your rights. If you are experiencing workplace discrimination, start documenting immediately. Keep a detailed record of every discriminatory comment and action with dates, times, locations, and names. Save every email and message. Request accommodations in writing and keep copies of responses. If your request is denied or you face retaliation, contact the EEOC at eeoc.gov. You have 180 days from the date of discrimination to file an EEOC charge. While having an attorney helps, you are not required to have one to file. To organizations like the Job Accommodation Network at askjan.org provide free consulting. Derek Palmer thought that because he couldn't see my Crohn's disease, it wasn't real. He thought someone with a chronic illness would be too weak or too scared to fight back. What he fundamentally misunderstood is that people with invisible disabilities develop a kind of resilience. Because we fight battles every single day just to exist and function in a world not designed for us. 3 years after that lawsuit, I'm running a $500,000 firm doing work that has genuine meaning, managing my Crohn's disease with the flexibility and dignity I always deserved, earning more than I ever would have staying at TechVantage. None of that would have happened if I had accepted Derek's version of who I was. Your disability is real even when other people cannot see it. Your need for accommodation is legitimate. You deserve to work somewhere that respects your dignity and gives you the tools to succeed. If you're not getting that, know that the law exists to protect you and organizations exist to help you enforce it. Thank you for watching Ocean Revenge. Please leave a comment sharing your story. Every story shared reminds someone else that they are not alone and that fighting back is possible.